Well, good morning, everyone. This is Melanie Houston, Director of Water Policy and Environmental Health for the Ohio Environmental Council. And we have a very exciting webinar prepared for you today. A webinar to preview a new investigative documentary on fracking called Triple Divide. And this film details negative impacts from shale gas development in northwest Pennsylvania and how those impacts were handled by state regulators there. The film includes exclusive interviews from industry representatives, state regulators, independent experts, and also everyday Americans suffering in the wake of shale gas development. The film is co-narrated by Academy Award-nominated actor and Ohio native Mark Ruffalo. The OEC is happy to be sponsoring this webinar today and supporting the Triple Divide Ohio tour during the month of September because we believe this film provides urgent caution signs for the state of Ohio. And we're happy to have Triple Divide's co-directors here with us today, whom I will introduce at this time. So Josh Probanek, first film director, has successfully started several nonprofit ventures, including sustainability projects on food systems and a for-profit grassroots publication in 2008 on regional news and syndicated investigative journalism. In 2011, he co-founded Public Herald with journalist Melissa Troutman, and his multimedia projects have appeared in publications worldwide. He's a supporter and participant of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and his mission is to expand the role of investigative journalism into a more dynamic expression of video and audio publications. His most recent work is Triple Divide, a feature-length documentary investigating the negative impacts of fracking. And also important to note, Josh is actually a native son from Sandusky, Ohio. Second co-director, Melissa Troutman, is an educator, writer, and journalist who has experience both in video production and still photography. Melissa's community-based approach to journalism is framed by a global mindset that points to the interconnection between people, places, and ideas. As managing editor of Public Herald, she curates investigative news from around the world in addition to producing her own. Her investigative reports of shale gas extraction were what prompted Josh Probanek to partner with her for their first feature-length documentary, Triple Divide. Melissa was born and raised just a few miles from the Triple Continental Divide in northwest Pennsylvania, for which the film is named. Finally, before we start, just a little about the Ohio Environmental Council and then a little bit of background on hydraulic fracturing. So the OEC is a statewide environmental advocacy organization with 3,000 individual members and about 100 group members across the state. Our work includes legislative work, public and media outreach and education, and legal action. We have 19 staff, which includes policy and development staff, and a law center with 2 staff attorneys. Please consider joining the OEC and becoming part of the community working to restore, protect, and strengthen the quality of life for Ohio's families and communities in Ohio. As with any industrial activity, the development of oil and gas involves risks to air, land, water, wildlife, and communities. And many of you have probably seen these sorts of images depicting the new combination of horizontal drilling with hydraulic fracturing, which is the use of sand, water, and chemicals injected at high pressures to blast open deep shale rock and release the trapped oil and gas. What's important to note is that while industry argues that this technology has been around for 40 years, that is not the full picture. While the use of hydraulic fracturing to drill vertical wells has been around that long, using the technique of hydraulic fracturing combined with horizontal drilling is very new and only began in 2011 in Ohio. And Ohio is really just at the infancy stage in terms of shale gas development compared to Pennsylvania. Since the end of 2011, Ohio has approved permits for more than 800 production wells, over 500 of which have been drilled. And while the rate of growth has been accelerating in the last year, you can still see that Pennsylvania is far ahead of Ohio in the adult stage of development, so to speak, with over 10,000 wells permitted and over 7,000 wells drilled. And so it is with this perspective that we look to our sister state to the east and to this film, Triple Divide, to clue us in to what may be coming to Ohio as this industrial activity fills more of our landscapes, consumes more of our air and water, and affects more of our communities. The OEC has partnered with Triple Divide's Josh Probanek and Melissa Troutman since early summer, not only to bring Triple Divide to Columbus on September 10th, but to help bring the film to 10 different locations across the state this month. And we hope that we have representation on the webinar today from all of these regions. And now I'd like to give Triple Divide film directors Josh and Melissa the opportunity to share with you 2 short but critical clips from their film. Please remember that you'll need to look in the chat box or the webinar slides to find the Vimeo links to view these films. You will need to then copy and paste these links into a web browser, and if you have difficulty with one web browser, you may try something different. So if Google Chrome doesn't work well, you may try Internet Explorer, for example. And please write us in the chat box if you have any problems that you're experiencing. So Josh, at this time, please go ahead and post the first Vimeo link in the chat box. And we will advance the slide, and there's also a Vimeo link in our first slide here. I'm going to give a moment for Josh to give a brief introduction, and when he completes his introduction, we'll provide a little bit over 2 minutes for everyone to view the clip, and then I will resume the webinar. So we'll have a silent period here on the webinar for about 2 minutes, and then we will resume. And there we have posted in the chat box.
Hi, my name is Joshua Probanek. I'm the co-director of Triple Divide. I just pasted the first link for everyone to watch inside of the chat box here. And that link is for the third chapter of Triple Divide, which is on pre-drill testing and the Bradford County blowout of 2011. The chapter is called Shoveling Water, and the clip runs 2 minutes and 20 seconds with narration from Melissa Troutman, Mark Ruffalo, and there's appearances from environmental attorney Bob Ging, Chesapeake Energy's Michael Keys, and Chesapeake Energy's Stephanie Timmermeyer. And I guess we'll go ahead and allow for the 2 minutes and 20-second clip to play out, and we will rejoin here in roughly 4 minutes to go over what was actually in the clip, and then we can go into the second clip after that.
I apologize. Josh's chat just went to us over here, so I just reposted it. It's the Vimeo clip. You should be able to just click on that or cut and paste, and it'll launch. We'll give you 2 minutes to watch it.
Okay, so I hope most folks had a success in being able to view the Vimeo link. At this time, Josh, please go ahead and take a moment to debrief the film clip if you'd like. And then after that, Melissa, please go ahead and post the second Vimeo link when Josh is finished and take a moment to introduce that clip. After Melissa's introduction, we'll provide another approximate 2 minutes for everyone to view the second clip once the Vimeo link is posted, and I'll resume the webinar again at that time.
Okay, everyone, the clip you just watched is, like I said, it's from the Chesapeake Energy Bradford blowout of 2011, which was considered to be a worst-case scenario in Pennsylvania. A blowout is always considered to be a worst-case scenario at a well pad. In this particular instance, they had roughly 10,000 gallons of flowback fluid that was recorded that went into a nearby creek, and then they had increase in contaminants in water wells for 3 different homes surrounding the well itself. The significant part about this is that in the past, a pre-drill test and a post-drill test was usually indicative enough for a homeowner to secure their interest and to protect their interest for their drinking water supply. But in this case, we found out that the pre-drill test that was conducted by Chesapeake Energy through an EPA-certified laboratory was in fact dismissed by the company and was allowed to be dismissed by the company by the Department of Environmental Protection. And after the pre-drill test was dismissed, that removed liability on Chesapeake Energy. The significance of this also is that we found other cases of this that are not in the film because we didn't have time to explain them, but we're going to be doing a follow-up report about that. And I think that's pretty much it in terms of that clip. The one other thing is that the pre-drill testing is something that the industry has been looking very closely at. And the reason they are is because they're building a water quality map with the help of the Marcellus Shale Coalition and the Department of Environmental Protection that's going to show what the pre-drill tests are across the state. And of course, in a case like this, where a pre-drill test is allowed to be dismissed, that changes the pre-existing condition of that drinking water well and says that it was always contaminated before gas drilling began. And in that particular pre-drill map that would be published, this area would have background conditions. So it's very significant when pre-drill tests don't hold water and when they're not used as significant evidence in an investigation to hold a natural gas company liable.
All right, we'll paste the second video link in here. And this one also deals with the effects on groundwater quality, but through the illegal burial of waste and illegal waste disposal.
All right, we'll provide everyone about a little over 2 minutes to view this clip. You should see in the chat box the Vimeo link and also in the slide here, and we'll resume the webinar in about 2.5 minutes. All right, well, hopefully everyone had success in viewing the second clip there. And at this time, I'd like to give Melissa an opportunity to debrief the film clip, if you'd like, Melissa.
Sure, yes. So there's a couple things going on here. You're introduced to Judy, who has had water contamination after gas drilling commenced on a neighbor's property. You have the illegal burying of waste. Well, in this case, it was an illegal burial of waste. It's actually legal in Pennsylvania to bury waste pits, which include drill cuttings, some fluids that have to be solidified. It's legal to bury them with an approved application in Pennsylvania, as long as it's above at least 18 inches, I believe it is, above the seasonal high water table. So that, of course, if the liner that's used to contain the waste is compromised in some way and happen to leak out, that there's still some soil between the bottom of the pit and the seasonal high water table, which is the highest the groundwater level ever gets to the surface. And the gas company working next to Judy buried their waste pit despite a denied application to do so from Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection. And during DEP's investigation of Judy's water complaint, they never disclosed to her that there was a buried waste pit there. And lo and behold, some of the stuff that ended up in her water are things that are associated with Marcellus Shale drilling waste.
Okay, well, thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Josh, both of you, for those introductions and explanation of the film clips. We're hoping at this point that your interest has been severely piqued by these short clips, and as such, would like to remind everyone that you'll have an opportunity, actually 10 different opportunities this month, the month of September, to see this film in its entirety. So the first screening will take place, the first of the Ohio tour, in 1 week, so next Tuesday, September 10th, at the Gateway Film Center in Columbus, Ohio, for those of you on the call that are close to that region. And then there'll be 9 more screenings across the state to follow. And you can see in this black and white poster image here where those locations are, what region of the state, the date and the show time. And then for more specific details on the exact location, you can view tripledivide.film.org. Again, that's tripledivide.film.org to see, and you click on screenings to see a list of those screenings. You can also check out the OEC's calendar at theoec.org. And again, find the specific locations for those film screenings. So at this time, we'd like to take questions for the film directors. I'd ask that you could please type your questions in the chat box, and we'll give a few moments for those to start streaming in. To begin with, we'd like to give first priority to members of the press, and from there we can open it up to questions from the entire audience of folks. So go ahead and start sending those questions in that you might have from the film clips, questions you might have about the Triple Divide Film Tour, which begins next Tuesday, September 10th, and any other questions that you might have for Josh or Melissa. I will sort of take in those questions and moderate those questions and read those aloud to Josh and Melissa, and we will begin answering those as soon as those come in. All right. I'm guessing there might be some questions out there. Just give us a moment to sort through some of these. Looks like we had a few difficulties with folks of seeing the clips. I think there will be an opportunity to see the clips again, perhaps after the film, with permission from the film directors. We do have one question from the audience, and still hoping to get some specifically from the press, but we'll start with this one. Why, Josh and Melissa, did you make this film?
I particularly made this film because I was invited to come and look at the natural gas drilling that was happening in Potter County, Pennsylvania in April of 2011 by local residents who were concerned about it and who had known about some brownfield reporting that I did in Ohio. After I came and I was able to see the scale at which the natural gas drilling was going on, it was hard for me to ignore a lot of red flags and a lot of questions that I had that I needed to attempt to get answers to. And after I met Melissa, she clarified a lot of those concerns and a lot of the ambiguity around the natural gas industry, and the fact that the public also had a lot of the same questions that I had, but nobody was able to answer it at that time. So we took it step by step from the beginning. And we made this film because we felt that investigative journalism was really needed in the north central area of Pennsylvania, and that it was necessary to release these reports to the public so that they had a better understanding and a clear understanding of what the negative impacts of natural gas drilling are and how these conclusions are being made by our state regulators.
Yeah, for me, it's personal and professional. I'm actually from Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania, and I grew up in the state forests, and on a trip home one summer I noticed that they were drilling next to exceptional value waterways, which was a really big surprise for me. Exceptional value waterways in Pennsylvania are our most highly protected, so to speak, waterways. They are sensitive forested watersheds where native populations of brook trout and these sorts of things live. So that was the personal part. And then professionally, I was covering the natural gas beat as a newspaper reporter, and noticed some various well, just red flags. I'll use Josh's phrase. A lot of red flags when I started to look into investigations that the state was doing into water contamination and things of that nature. So we decided, when Josh came to me and asked if I wanted to do a documentary to look into it all a little more in depth, I said, sure.
Great. It looks like we have a question from the press more specifically. Is there any way to see the film, Josh and Melissa, before September 10th so that we can do preview articles, or is it available on Netflix, etc.?
Yes, if you're from the press and you want to preview the film, we can send you an online screener, and you can email Melissa or myself for that. My email is joshua@publicherald.org, and Melissa's email is melissa@publicherald.org.
Great. We're typing in your addresses into the chat box for everyone to see.
Great. Thanks, Melanie.
Okay, thank you.
Great. We have another question. Has Pennsylvania DEP changed the way they regulate as a result of this film?
Well, I've never asked them, so I couldn't really tell you for sure. But I know that groups and individuals working on regulatory upgrades in Pennsylvania have used our investigations as references for problems that exist and need to be fixed.
Yes, DEP has changed the way that they regulate and the way that they handle filing specifically. Triple Divide was involved in extensive file reviews at DEP's North Central office. At that time, we were finding missing files in waste reports. We were finding missing files in gas migration investigations. And we began to alert DEP of this information as we were making the film, and they consistently updated their file review process to account for it and to essentially make sure that they had all of the records on file in order to release information to the public. So when it came to how they regulated it, they were much more thorough in obtaining information from the natural gas industry. I can say that, for instance, Shell and Seneca Resources operated for up to 3 years without filing a single waste report until Triple Divide information came out, and then the DEP was required to request that information and try and make sure that these particular companies were following the Oil and Gas Act of 1984 and filing their 26R forms.
Okay. Why is the name of the film Triple Divide? I can repeat that one, Josh and Melissa. Why is the name of the film Triple Divide?
The film's called Triple Divide because there's a very unique hydrologic landscape in north central Pennsylvania, and that is a triple continental divide, where water flows into 3 separate river basins and ends up on 3 separate sides of the North American continent. Now, water flowing into 3 separate river basins is ubiquitous. It's not exactly unique, but the one in Potter County, Pennsylvania is, because it is the convergence of 2 continental divides, and the water flows to 3 separate sides of the continent. So downstream has a much wider, I guess, application there.
Yeah, the Triple Divide watershed would be one of the largest, or if not the largest, on the east coast of the United States, sending water from north central Pennsylvania to the Gulf of Mexico, down to the Chesapeake Bay, and then north up to the St. Lawrence River Basin.
Okay, thank you, Josh and Melissa. We have another question coming from the press specifically. It's geared more toward Ohio, but I'm going to let you answer first for Pennsylvania, and then I can follow up for Ohio and do my best to answer for our state. The question, it's a 2-part question. The first is, are pre- and post-drill tests being routinely conducted by the appropriate parties in Ohio and monitored by the state EPA? And so that would relate for Pennsylvania, we would say in Pennsylvania and by their DEP. And are there safe ways to perform horizontal hydraulic fracturing?
I'm going to answer the second part of your question first, and are there safe ways to handle horizontal hydraulic fracturing? According to the information that we found, it's just, in general, they have a lot of complaints when it comes to drilling a well. They have a lot of spills. They have a lot of well integrity failures, meaning that the cement grout on the well or the casing itself is failing and allowing for the migration of fluids or the migration of methane into an aquifer. So I can't say that hydraulic fracturing at this point is being conducted in a safe way according to the information that's been presented to us in files at the DEP's office and according to the field experience that we have talking with residents in Pennsylvania. In terms of pre-drill tests in Ohio, I'll let the OAC answer that, but for pre-drill testing and post-drill testing in Pennsylvania, Melissa can fill us in.
Yeah, most companies conduct pre-drill testing. It's a safeguard against them being blamed for any water contamination that might occur within 12 months of their operations, or 2,500 feet of their operations within 12 months. And I do want to say something about whether hydraulic fracturing is safe. With every single hole that's punched in the ground, from what the experts we've talked with and just some experience with legacy wells and abandoned oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania, every new hole is a risk for life because of the inaccuracy many times of grouting and cementing. And hydraulic fracturing itself uses such intense pressure that it actually moves substrata underground. And we actually have a film or a chapter in the film dedicated completely to this issue. It's called The Pressure Bulb. And while, of course, there are wells that are drilled and fracked where there haven't been problems noticed or recorded, there are many that have. And so I don't think, if there is anybody out there saying that it is safe, any sort of general statement like that is really risky itself.
I think they should define what what safe is. You know, in terms of safe, in my opinion, that would mean that there would be no risk to the health of the property owner, and that there would be no risk to the quality of the drinking water well. And like I said, according to the research that we have and the evidence that we have on file, this hasn't proven to be true. And with pre-drill testing across Pennsylvania, companies generally will conduct pre-drill tests for a well that they construct within a radius of around 2,500 feet, and they will hold that data most often to themselves unless an investigation comes along or if the property owner requests the information. Post-drill testing is not as often conducted. It's generally only conducted once a complaint is made and once an investigation ensues, or once a complaint is made directly to a company, or if a company has a violation and the state requires them to do post-drill testing. But post-drill testing is not something that's very well monitored, and pre-drill testing, again, is a very big issue and a very big question, because according to the EPA, you know, during an investigation, you'd be required to do pre-drill tests once every quarter. And right now, the requirement for pre-drill testing in Pennsylvania to secure residents' interest is once a year. But again, the cost of that to cover all the different chemicals involved, we're talking about $1,000 to do one test each year. If we had to do 4, we'd be looking at $4,000. So it's still a very, very serious concern in the state of Pennsylvania, and of course it'll be a blossoming concern in Ohio.
Thanks, Josh and Melissa. This is Melanie speaking again with the Ohio Environmental Council, and just real briefly for this question geared specifically toward Ohio for pre-drilling and post-drilling testing. Under Senate Bill 315, also known as the Governor's Energy Bill or Energy Legislation, there was a provision put in place requiring pre-drilling, so pre-drilling water testing. I believe there's no provision right now or requirement for post-drilling water testing. And I would just say that while that's a step forward, we are still very kind of not to the place where we need to be with full regulation of this industry. And a couple concerns specifically with that provision around, you know, the pre-drilling water testing. Our concerns would be who is conducting that water testing. It looks from the language as though that can be the company themselves conducting that testing, and therefore that information would be in their hands alone. And secondly, we don't have rules yet in place. So the rules are the specifics that need to come after legislation is passed, and that would be within the jurisdiction of our Ohio Department of Natural Resources, who does most of the oversight and regulation of this industry. So my understanding so far is that no, Ohio EPA is not involved in that pre- and post-drilling testing and monitoring, that it is under the jurisdiction of the ODNR, and that they have yet to put into place and release for public comment rules to come under Senate Bill 315 and the legislation which now says that we need to have this pre-drilling water testing. So we're going to go ahead and move on just for time's sake here. We've got some more questions. The next question is, did Chesapeake only take one pre-drill well sample? Yes,
with practically every single well that's drilled. As we mentioned, according to the Oil and Gas Act of 1984, for the companies to protect their interests, they only need to conduct one pre-drill test. For a homeowner to protect their interest, they only need to conduct one pre-drill test, and that should be sufficient evidence to show that if there's post-drill contamination, that the company should be held liable. but there's many loopholes to this. Of course, one of these loopholes that we've seen here is Chesapeake Energy was able to dismiss the pre-drill test by using anecdotal information given to them by the homeowner and by trying to match other wells in the area that might be consistent with the contamination in this well. So that's a there's various ways in which they try to negate the single pre-drill test, and yes, in most cases, only one test is taken.
Great. Another question has come in. Josh and Melissa, do you address disposal wells in the film? The Cincinnati area of Ohio is more is interested in that. Can such information, if present, be extracted into a short film to address this interest? Kind of a multi-part question.
Yes, we do address the Class 2 injection wells, which are the disposal wells in Ohio and across the United States that accept fracturing fluids. We did this by talking specifically about what the violations are in this wells, on those wells. So 1 out of 6 disposal wells in the country have well construction failures. Again, this is similar to a well construction failure on a fracked well where the cement grout has gone bad, the casing has gone bad, and there's an opportunity for those fluids to move into an aquifer. The other comparison that we make in the film, which I'm kind of spoiling at this point, is if you look at the map that's on the screen right now, you see all these red dots that indicate the amount of wells that have been drilled in Pennsylvania. For each one of those wells, there's 5 million gallons of fracking fluids that are disposed into the well to fracture it, and they only get roughly 50% at best in some cases of that fluid back up to the surface. The rest stays underground in perpetuity. So essentially what we have is for every single well that's fracked, for every new well that's drilled, we have a brand new disposal well. We have a brand new Class 2 injection well. Although the EPA has not been permitting these as such, they do in method operate the exact same way. And we have Bob Gang talking about the disposal wells in the film, and we have Bob Haig also talking about the disposal of contaminants in the film.
All right, we have, thank you, Josh. We have another, I have 2 questions I'm going to actually combine here because they're similar. Some earlier films were discounted as quote-unquote hearsay. How is your film different so that non-believers will see the problems, or isn't the general public your target audience? And then the second part of the question, what's been the reaction of the oil and gas industry and Pennsylvania state officials to Triple Divide?
Well, the industry hasn't given us any much attention at all. We did have a couple. We had one person from Energy in Depth come to a recent screening, and we had one person come to one of our test screenings, and they both said that the film was really well done. And then, of course, started talking about all the benefits. And I think the only negative comment that the industry has had so far is that it doesn't cover the benefits. And our response is always, this film has a very specific question that it's trying to answer, and that is, how are the negative impacts being handled by the folks in charge, by the industry and by the state? The state officials, Scott Perry, who's the head of oil and gas at our Pennsylvania DEP here, also said that the film was very well done. But again, really isn't paying much attention to it. And that might be because they don't want people to see it. I don't know. And then, I'm sorry, Melanie, remind me of your first question.
Sure. So it's sort of about is the general public your target audience, and how is this film maybe different from earlier films that were discounted as hearsay?
I think that the way that this film is different, and one of the most important ways that this film is different, is we're not approaching the audience in a first-person perspective. So we're not really giving you our opinions. in the film. We're not giving you our bias in the film. We're presenting you with the evidence in the cradle-to-grave investigation for how the DEP, how state regulations handle natural gas drilling impacts, and how the industry handles natural gas drilling impacts, and what the experience is in full detail for those homeowners during those impacts. So in real time, you're going to be able to see what the effects are on someone when they have, for instance, flaring next to their property. You can see the emotional reactions that go through those people, and all these different important details. The thing that the thing that we hear from the audience about what sets it apart is the fact that they feel like they're able to kind of like draw their own opinions, that they're not being led into anything, and they just think that the evidence in the film and the information in the film is shockingly different from any of the other films that have been released so far.
Great. Thank you, Josh and Melissa. Another question here from the press. Does any other state have a testing program that could be held out as a best practice, perhaps incorporating numerous rounds of both pre- and post-drilling samples?
Well, according to Pennsylvania's regulators, they have the best. I'm in the process of making my way through draft regulations in Maryland that seem to do a much better job than Pennsylvania. So I can't answer that definitively. But Josh, do you have anything else?
I mean, what we hear when it comes to state regulations.
I mean, Texas says they have the best.
Yeah, everybody has the best. I credit Pennsylvania because at the time that the Oil and Gas Act of 1984, at the time that was being drawn up, it was being drawn up by some very smart, some very seasoned people in the field, people like Bob Ging, people like Howie Gustafson, who we actually get to hear from in the film, who was on the Oil and Gas Act Committee of 1984. And of course, Pennsylvania has like some of the most wells that are drilled in the country. It was the beginning of our oil rush. Much of Ida Tarbell's history of Standard Oil was written in regards to what happened in Pennsylvania. So I would say Pennsylvania has the most experience and is qualified more so than many other states to make clear direction and clear decisions about state regulations. And I think they do have very strong and very good regulations in the state. But unfortunately, the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, is not enforcing those regulations. They're not holding the gas companies accountable, and they're allowing gas companies to continue to be in compliance even though they're in violation of the law. And we go over that in the film in detail so the audience can see what that means.
All right. It looks like we're coming up on one of our last questions. If you think that I've maybe missed your question, or you have a follow-up question, or you haven't asked a question yet and you'd like to, now is the opportunity to type that into the chat box and get your questions here answered for Josh and Melissa. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and give the last one that we have here in front of us. So the question is, and I'll let Josh and Melissa speak to this first, and then I can chime in a little bit. I have noticed that there are a few brine trucks coming from Pennsylvania to Ohio. Ohio is accepting huge amounts of brine, quote-unquote brine. Why do I not see more trucks on the interstates? If you have some thoughts, Josh or Melissa.
As to why they're seeing the waste trucks not on highways but on 2-lane roads and county or state roads, county roads.
Well, that could be one interpretation of the question. The other kind of way of interpreting it, I think, is perhaps just that this person has noticed an absence of trucks altogether, but yet we know that the volumes are very high from our news and reports data that we have here in Ohio. And so I think this person is wondering maybe why they're not seeing more trucks. But if that person would like to clarify their question, if that's just on the interstates or on the highways, I would welcome that participant to clarify the question.
Well, I'll take a stab at it.
Sure.
I would first ask where the person's from, and if I had time and could look in depth and look at maybe some of the permitting activity for disposal around that area. Maybe they're taking it somewhere else, further away from the panel, or from the person who asked the question. In Pennsylvania, we've had a lot of reports from folks who say that they once saw a lot of trucks in the day, but now they're seeing, but now more and more trucks are running at night. And they were under the impression that the industry was running its waste trucks at night as a way to either avoid traffic on the roads, because we've had a lot of truck accidents as well, and that can be pretty hairy, or that they don't want to be seen. I mean, can speculate all day, but I guess a lot of things could contribute to that. And I have to find out where that person is from.
I think the important thing to note is that we just don't have a clear understanding of the transportation of this waste, because state regulations don't require weekly reports, they don't require daily reports. It's more of a biannual thing or an annual thing when we look at that information. And we can't necessarily track each truckload, but only more of the aggregated data. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to be misinformed, and for all of us to be misinformed about how the waste is actually being handled. And of course, we've seen quite a bit of illegal dumping of this waste in either mine shafts, rivers, or waste facilities that aren't permitted to take it in the first place.
Great, thanks Josh and Melissa. And that person did write in to clarify. He or she is from Summit County, Ohio, which is adjacent to Portage and Stark counties, which I believe, if I'm correct here, have been some of our the kind of highest on the list in terms of accepting fracking waste and brines. And she said, she or he said that they've been specifically watching for the trucks. So I would echo sort of what Melissa was saying, that it's quite possible that the trucks are on the road at night. It may also be possible that the trucks are not labeled in a way that it would be apparent to any of us, what they're carrying. But the data is suggesting that these heavy volumes are coming, to Ohio from Pennsylvania and from West Virginia. So we're going to move on. We do have another question that's come in. Josh and Melissa, what's the best thing for an individual to do to protect his or her water supply? And there's an additional comment that this person has attended many oil and gas seminars in Northeast Ohio, and that folks don't seem to be worried about the negative impacts.
Well, I'll tell everybody precisely what I told my parents living up in Potter County, is just get your water tested. You need to get a Tier 3 water test that covers all the parameters associated with oil and gas drilling and hydraulic fracturing. It is pricey, but just think of it as an investment in your home, and if you can't afford to, there are some colleges, and OEC might be able to help you pinpoint who might be offering free pre-drill testing. For example, Penn State University in Pennsylvania was doing free pre-drill testing for homeowners and post-drill, because they wanted to see if there were differences or changes in water quality. I would also take a gander at the Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project. I believe their website is just www.environmentalhealthproject.org. They are based in Washington County, Pennsylvania, which is the second most drilled county, and they are the only group working on the public health side of things. They have many suggestions for how to monitor your air quality and water quality in your home, and they have a list of really practical steps that you can take to decrease your exposure if you end up living next to a compressor station, for example, or a well site.
I'm just going to add to that. I've spent the last week reading over the complaint files, the water complaint files for 4 different counties in north central Pennsylvania. And essentially, if you're if you're living next to a gas well and you're talking about protecting your water quality interests so that no contamination happens, that's not likely going to be a reality. Water contamination has happened and oftentimes is happening next to natural gas well pads, according to these complaint files and according to these investigations. The one that we're looking at closely right now involves 18 families and 4 Chesapeake Energy gas wells, and that particular plume of pollution stretches for a 4-mile radius. And again, we often see these in low-lying areas. People on top of the hills don't experience as much problem as people at the bottom of the hill. I can say that. So if you're at the top of the hill, you might consider yourself lucky. And in terms of protection, make sure that, like you said, like Melissa said, to get your water tested, get it tested through an EPA-certified lab. And if you're able to, have it tested each quarter, at least one time. If not, maybe not every year, but at least one time so that you can establish a full year of background data.
And in between Tier 3 tests, the Southwest Environmental Health Project does have free water quality water testing units. They're small and handheld, and they measure total dissolved solids, TDS. Now that's not going to tell you if methane has made it into your water well, but there are other signs that, like the fizzing of the water, and you can sometimes smell other things that are migrating with methane in your water. But just for peace of mind every day, you can actually get a TDS testing unit and monitor your tap water, and just keep a little journal or pen and paper close by where you can write down your TDS levels on maybe a daily or weekly basis. And again, this isn't going to tell you precisely what's in your water, but if you see a spike in the numbers that you're getting, that might be a time when you want to get further testing.
And the other thing you can do is, if your neighbor's leasing or if you were leasing, to make sure that you bring your neighbors and you bring yourself to come and see the film as we tour it across 10 different locations in Ohio. The Ohio Environmental Council has all the dates on their website, so you can see exactly where we're going to be. And the goal of this is to give the public an opportunity to prevent what are inevitable negative impacts on their property. And ways that they can do that is through the contract of their leases. They can make sure that there's provisions in those contracts which forces the company to use a better management practice than they would normally use. The industry always claims to be using best management practices on their wells, but if your contract states very specific things about what you want protected, it's much more likely that that gas company is going to take more provisions, and they're going to look after your interests more closely. And we have these things in the film, and these things in the film can give you the chance to make sure that your lawyer knows that it's inside of your lease.
Okay, so great. Thank you, Josh. You have hit on one of our questions already about what is the goal of the Ohio tour. And just to address the second part of that question, how can I get tickets? For the Columbus screening, at least for the first screening of the Ohio Triple Divide Ohio tour, you can visit the OEC's website, so theoec.org/Triple Divide, and we have a link in our event posting that will take you directly to the Gateway's site to be able to purchase the ticket in advance. And then I'll let Josh speak to whether that's available for the other tour. Josh or Melissa, is that available for some of the other locations, or how would folks go about getting tickets for some of the other locations?
The best way to know about getting tickets, some of these are free, some of these have admission costs, is to go to tripledividefilm.org/screenings, and on that page we have links to each location. We have each location listed, and there's an embedded link, so you can click on that, and that'll take you to where you can either purchase tickets or whether you'll know if the showing is free or not. So that's the best way to find that information.
Two more questions.
Okay, we're going to put both of those websites in the chat box here. And we've got two more questions that have come in. Is there any way we can store a sample of our water in a way that it could be used in court if we have water contamination at a later date?
I don't think that would hold up in court at all. No. But I think that if you suspect that you've either been contaminated or you're worried that you might, you can go ahead and store containers, and it's something that a doctor may be able to use in the future, and that's very valuable if you experience health problems. But in the court of law, your own water sample is not going to hold up.
And I'm going to plug the people I know in Ohio who have some of the most experience and some of the most level-minded responses to these questions, and that would be Haag Environmental Company. That's H-A-A-G Environmental Company, and they can give you a clear understanding since they've worked on Superfund sites in Ohio, they've worked on brownfield sites in Ohio. They can let you know what to do if you do have contamination on your property and you want to document it. Of course, they would recommend that safety is first and foremost. You don't want to harm yourself in trying to obtain evidence. But getting photographs of what happened is really important. There's indicators of a spill. Color indicators like red or salt rims usually are connected with flowback spills. So having pictures is really important. And if it's a very concentrated thing where you have an obvious spill of hydrochloric acid, which they've had across Pennsylvania in different locations of Bradford County, and it goes into a water supply, you're generally going to see dead fish and that type of thing. But again, you need to use very extreme caution when trying to obtain any samples if it's something that you considered is contaminated, because it could definitely affect you in the long run.
All right, great. So this is going to be the last call for questions. To type those into the chat box. And if we don't see any more, this will be our last question. Josh and Melissa, does what you've seen indicate that vertical fracking is safer than horizontal fracking?
No, not really. I mean, we've looked at horizontal fracking, vertical fracking, and conventional drilling, lost and abandoned oil and gas wells. And at the end of all of it, every time you punch a hole in the ground through a groundwater aquifer, you don't even have to frack. Some contamination happens before a well is fracked. It's just contaminated through the drilling process, whether it's fracked vertically or horizontally.
And I would go back to the disposal topic that was brought up earlier. When you're disposing of waste underground, the safest way to do it is with no pressure at all. And here we are putting these fluids down X thousands of feet underground and disposing of them in similar ways, but we're doing so under extreme pressures, and we are compromising the integrity of the rock strata. Whether that's vertically or whether that's horizontally, if you're still using the same amount of pressure and the same mixture of fluids and the same type of well casings and the same type of cement grout, then you're at risk for issues at this point.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Josh and Melissa. Thanks everyone who has joined us today, both members of the public and members of the press. It looks like we've reached the end of our questions and come close to the time also that we have available today. Just a couple reminders. Today's webinar was actually recorded, and it will be available on the OEC website by tomorrow morning. All webinar participants will receive an email with the link for that webinar recording. Also, please consider joining us next Monday, September 9th. We'll have a webinar covering OEC's Fracking Megabill, a preview of that piece of legislation. And again, September 10th, a Tuesday evening, beginning at 6 p.m. for a social mixer, and with the film to start at 7, and question and answer, more opportunity to actually meet Josh and Melissa in person in Columbus, and that's next Tuesday, September 10th. A whole slew of opportunities to see this film in different parts of the state, ranging from September 12th in Mansfield all the way through September 27th in Sandusky. Really encourage you to get out and see this film in its entirety and get to meet Josh and or Melissa in person. The OEC will be having folks from our office attending some of those screenings as well, so we would love to see you there. If you have further questions, please do feel free to be in contact with us. Our email addresses are listed here on this last slide. Again, you can find our information at theoec.org or tripledivide.film.org, and we hope to see you in person at one or more of these screenings this month. Have a great day, folks. Thanks for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.